I don't know why I saved that voicemail. I must have listened to it 40 times in the days that followed, trying to hear what I missed the first time. My son's voice, flat and rehearsed, like he was reading from a card someone had placed in front of him. "Dad, don't make the drive this year. We're doing something low-key. I'll call you after the holiday." That was it. No love you. "No, tell Mom I said hi," even though his mother had been gone for 3 years, and he still said it out of habit every single time we talked. Just that strange, hollow sentence, and then the click of the line going dead. I stood in my kitchen, holding my phone and staring out at the back field. The grass had gone brown. The oak tree my wife planted the year our son was born had dropped its last leaves. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and I had already packed my bag. I am 63 years old. I spent 22 years working construction, another decade running my own small contracting business before my knees made that decision for me. I am not a man who panics. I am not a man who reads disaster into every unanswered text. But I have been my son's father for 38 years, and I know his voice the way I know the sound of a board that's about to give. There is a particular creak it makes right before it breaks. That voicemail had that sound in it. I called him back 3 times. It went to voicemail each time. I called his wife. Same thing. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was a 63-year-old man with too much time on his hands and a tendency to worry since his wife passed. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and lasted about 11 minutes before I picked up my keys. It is a 4-hour drive from my house in central Virginia to the town in western North Carolina, where my son and his wife had settled. I have made that drive more times than I can count. I know every exit, every rest stop, every stretch of mountain road where the cell signal goes thin and the trees close in on both sides like walls. I made it in 3 hours and 40 minutes that Wednesday night, driving faster than I should have, watching the sun go down in my rearview mirror until there was nothing behind me but dark. My son's name is Daniel. He is 38 years old, tall like his mother's side of the family, with her same dark eyes and her same habit of going quiet when something is bothering him instead of saying it out loud. He had been married for 4 years to a woman whose family owned a significant amount of property in that county. Her father was a man who had spent 30 years collecting favors and calling them in, the kind of man who knew the name of every sheriff's deputy and county commissioner from here to the Tennessee border. I had never liked him. I had never said that to Daniel, because Daniel loved his wife, and I loved Daniel, and some things a father keeps to himself. I knew something was wrong before I even turned onto their road. The lights in the house were blazing, every window lit up, and I could hear music from 50 yards away. There were 4 trucks parked in the gravel driveway that I did not recognize, and a catering van pulled up on the grass beside the garage that Daniel had spent 2 summers building with his own hands. I sat in my car for a moment, with the engine off, watching the shadows move behind the curtains. It looked like a party, a real one, the kind with caterers and a playlist and people who had been drinking since noon. I want to stop here and explain something, because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why didn't you call the police right then? I want you to understand why I didn't. My son's father-in-law had 2 nephews on the county sheriff's department. He had been on the county planning commission for 11 years. The local police chief had attended his daughter's wedding, sat at the head table, given a toast. I had watched that happen with my own eyes. These were not officers who would take a call from an out-of-town father and put the interests of my son above the interests of a man who had been writing checks to local campaigns since before some of those officers were born. Calling the local police that night would not have helped Daniel. It would have warned them that I was there. I got out of my car and walked to the front door. I did not knock. I opened it. The living room was full of people I recognized and some I didn't. His wife's 2 brothers were there, her mother, 3 or 4 cousins, and the father himself standing by the fireplace with a glass of bourbon, wearing a blazer like he owned the place. Which, I was starting to understand, was exactly how he saw it. The room went quiet when I walked in. His father-in-law looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has been caught doing something he fully intended to do and is not especially sorry about it. He was a big man, gone soft in his 60s, with the kind of confidence that comes not from strength but from years of never facing real consequences. "Nash," he said. He called me by my last name, always had, the way men do when they want to make clear they don't consider you a friend. "Didn't expect to see you." "Where's my son?" I said. Not a question. He heard the difference. His wife came in from the kitchen then, her mother right behind her, and the look on her face was not the look of a woman surprised to see her father-in-law. It was the look of a woman who had been expecting this moment and had decided how she was going to handle it. "Daniel isn't feeling well," she said. "He's resting. Then I'll go check on him." He asked not to be disturbed. I looked at her for a long moment. She was not a cruel person by nature. I had believed that for 4 years, and I still half believed it standing there. But she was a person who had grown up watching her father get everything he wanted by simply deciding that he was entitled to it, and some of that had gotten into her in ways she may not have even been aware of. I saw something behind her eyes that I can only describe as sorry. Not sorry enough to stop what was happening, but sorry in the way of someone who has already decided the cost is acceptable. "I'm going to see my son," I said, and I walked past her toward the hallway. One of her brothers stepped in front of me. He was a large man in his early 40s, the kind who had probably played football in high school and never quite moved on from it. "He said he doesn't want to see anyone." "He didn't say that to me," I said. "Move." He didn't move. We stood there for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Behind me, the party had gone completely silent. I am 63 years old. I am not as strong as I was at 40, but I have spent most of my life doing physical work. And more importantly, I have nothing in the world to lose that matters more than my son. I think he saw that. He stepped aside. I walked down the hallway. The door to the master bedroom was locked. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Harder. "Daniel, it's Dad." Open the door. Silence. Then, very quietly, from somewhere further back in the house, I heard a sound. A single knock. Rhythmic. Deliberate. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. The way I had taught him when he was 9 years old, when we used to play a game where he would hide somewhere in the house and I would have to find him. He never forgot things like that. Neither did I. The sound was coming from the door at the end of the hallway. The room they used for storage. The one with the key-locked deadbolt that Daniel had installed himself because he kept his tools and some of his father's old equipment in there. The door had a lock that required a key from both sides. You couldn't open it from the inside without a key. I tried the handle. Locked. I pressed my ear to the door. "Daniel." His voice came back muffled, strained, but unmistakably his. "Dad, I'm locked in. They took my phone." I will not pretend I was calm in that moment. I was not calm. My heart was doing something I had not felt since the night my wife went to the hospital for the last time. That specific cold dropping sensation in the chest that your body produces when the world is tilting somewhere you can't control. I pressed my hand flat against the door like I could reach through it. "Are you hurt?" A pause. My wrist. "I think it might be sprained." "They weren't. It was an accident," they said. "But Dad, you need to." I heard footsteps behind me. The brother had followed me down the hall. "He's fine," he said. "He just needs some time to cool down." There was a disagreement. I turned around slowly. "A disagreement," I said. "Family business. Nothing that concerns you." I looked at him for a moment. "My son is locked in a room in his own house, with a sprained wrist and no phone, and you're telling me it doesn't concern me?" "Nash." The father-in-law's voice came from behind his son, calm and measured, a voice that was used to making rooms go quiet. He had followed us down the hallway and stood now with his arms crossed, filling the narrow space. "Let's all take a breath. This is a family matter. A complicated one. Daniel and my daughter are working through some things." "Open the door," I said. "When he's ready to have a reasonable, open the door right now." Something shifted in his face. The patience thinned. Underneath it was something harder and less polite. "You're a guest in this house, Nash. Act like it." "This is my son's house," I said, "not yours. His name is on the deed. I know because I co-signed the loan." His jaw tightened just slightly, and I understood then with the clarity that comes when everything finally lines up, what the family business was. Daniel had been making noises for months about selling the property. He had mentioned it to me in passing, something about wanting to move, wanting a fresh start. The land around that house had gone up considerably in value in the past few years. There were developers interested. I knew because Daniel had mentioned it. And I knew, because I knew this man, that he had decided that land belonged to his family's interests, not to my son's, and that he had chosen Thanksgiving weekend when Daniel would be isolated, when I would presumably be 4 hours away, and not expecting trouble to make Daniel understand that. "I'm calling the state police," I said. "Go ahead," he said, and smiled. "My brother-in-law is a captain with the state police's Western District. Give him my regards." I held his gaze. He was right, and we both knew it. Any call I made in the next hour was going to land with someone who owed this man something. I needed time. I needed to get Daniel out of that room and out of that house, and I needed to make calls that would matter, calls that couldn't be rerouted or ignored. My nephew worked for a federal agency, not law enforcement, but he knew people, the right people, the kind who didn't answer to county commissioners. But first, I needed to get to my son. I looked at the door. I had built enough rooms in my life to know how they come apart. The deadbolt was solid, but the door frame was standard residential construction, hollow pine, the kind you find in most houses built after 2000. I had looked at that door earlier and noticed the hinges were on the outside. The father-in-law took a step toward me. His son moved to flank me from the other side. "You should leave," the father said. "Come back tomorrow when everyone's calmer. Daniel will call you." "He doesn't have his phone," I said. "You told me that yourself." I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my wallet. I have carried a flathead screwdriver in my back pocket every day for 40 years. It is a habit I picked up on my first job site and never broke. The foreman told me you never know when you'll need to open something that doesn't want to be opened. He was right more often than I could count. I crouched down in front of the bottom hinge. The pin was standard, not security set. I put the tip of the screwdriver under the cap. "What are you doing?" the brother said, and his voice had gone from confident to uncertain, which told me everything I needed to know about where his backbone actually came from. "Getting my son out," I said, and I drove the butt of my palm against the screwdriver handle. The first pin came free. The second one took longer. By the time I was working on the third, the father-in-law had gone quiet in that particular way that angry men go quiet when they realize the situation has moved somewhere they didn't plan for. I got the third pin free, wedged the screwdriver into the hinge gap on the door's opening side, and levered it. With the hinges gone, the deadbolt was just holding one edge. 3 hard shoves with my shoulder, and the door frame split along the weak side, and the door swung in. Daniel was sitting against the far wall. His right wrist was wrapped in his shirt, which he had torn into strips. There was a bruise along his jaw that was already going purple. He was in his socks. They had taken his shoes, which I understood immediately was deliberate. Try running on a gravel driveway in your socks in November in the North Carolina mountains. Try getting far. He looked up when I came in, and for a moment he just looked at me the way children look at you when you arrive at exactly the moment they stopped believing you would. He was 38 years old, and in that second he looked like he was 9, like he was the boy who used to knock on walls so I could find him. I crossed the room and got down on one knee next to him. "Can you stand?" "Yeah." He let me help him up. His wrist was swollen. Not broken, I didn't think, but bad enough. "How did you know to come?" "The voicemail," I said. "You didn't say love you." He closed his eyes for a second. I didn't even notice that. I did. I put his left arm over my shoulder, and we turned toward the door. The father-in-law was standing in the doorway. Behind him I could hear the sound of the party having resumed, or maybe having never really stopped. Music and voices and the clink of glasses, his son's house, and someone else's celebration happening inside it. The father looked at Daniel with an expression that had nothing warm in it, only the flat assessment of a man calculating whether a situation is still recoverable. "Daniel, this is not how we agreed to handle this." Daniel looked back at him. "I never agreed to anything." "Your wife is my wife," Daniel said. "Not your property, and neither am I." We walked out. The brother stepped back. The others in the hallway moved aside, not quickly enough for it to look willing, but quickly enough that we passed without being stopped. I kept my shoulder under Daniel's arm, and I kept moving, and I did not look at any of them until we were at the front door. I want to tell you what it looked like from outside, coming out of that house. The cold night air, the smell of wood smoke from somewhere down the road. Daniel walking carefully across the gravel to my car, no shoes, his breath making small clouds. The light from the house behind us, making long shadows on the driveway. I opened the passenger door and helped him in and walked around to the driver's side, and for a moment, I just sat there with my hands on the wheel. "Your car," Daniel said. "What about it?" "They slashed one of the tires. I heard them. Earlier, I heard someone outside. I got out and looked. The rear driver's side was flat. I got back in the car. The father had appeared on the front porch, watching. His arms were still crossed. He had his phone out now, and I did not think he was calling his wife. "He's calling someone," I said. "He'll call Deputy Carver. He responds to him directly." I had a spare. Changing a tire in the dark on a gravel driveway with my son, sitting injured in the front seat, while a man with local political connections made calls from 30 feet away, was not a situation I had planned for, but it was the situation I had. I keep my spare and my jack in good condition. My wife always teased me about checking them every time I drove more than an hour from home. I thought about her while I worked, in the specific way I think about her in difficult moments. The way you carry people who are gone, not as memory, exactly, but as presence, like a hand on your shoulder that isn't there but helps anyway. I got the tire changed in 12 minutes. It felt like an hour. When I got back in the car, Daniel had his eyes closed and his head against the headrest. "I'm going to drive us to the county line," I said. "Then I'm calling my nephew. He's going to send Carver. Carver doesn't have jurisdiction past the county line. Once we're out, we're talking to state people. Real state people. I know who to call." I backed out of the driveway. The father stood on the porch and watched us go. He did not move. He was the kind of man who had always won by waiting, by letting situations come to him while he stood still. I think he believed that night would end the same way. It didn't. My nephew is not in law enforcement, but he spent 12 years working adjacent to it, in a federal oversight capacity that I will not detail here because he asked me not to, but that gave him the kind of relationships that matter when local channels have been compromised. I called him from a gas station parking lot 22 miles from that county, with Daniel next to me drinking a coffee I had bought him and holding his wrist carefully against his chest. I told my nephew everything. I spoke for 9 minutes without stopping. He listened without interrupting, which is how I knew he understood the seriousness of it, because normally he interrupts constantly. When I finished, there was a short silence. "Where are you now?" I told him. "Stay there. Don't go back across that county line tonight. I'll make some calls. Daniel needs a doctor. There's an urgent care about 8 miles north of where you are. Go there. I'll have someone meet you." We went. Daniel's wrist was indeed sprained, not broken, but he had a mild concussion from hitting his head when they pushed him into that storage room. The bruise on his jaw was from a shove, he told me, from the brother, when he had tried to get to his phone. He said it quietly and without drama, the way people say things that they're still processing, that haven't yet settled into a shape they know how to feel about. "How long had this been building?" I asked him. He was quiet for a while, longer than I told you. "A few months. Since I started talking to the developer, they wanted me to sign everything over to a family LLC, make it so they had equal claim on any sale. I said no. I thought—" He stopped. "I thought she would take my side." I didn't say anything. Some things a father knows, to leave alone. "She does love me," he said. "I really believe that. She just loves him more. She's always loved him more than she's loved anything." I put my hand on his shoulder and left it there. The next 72 hours were not simple. Nothing about situations like this is ever simple. There were attorneys involved, and federal contacts, and a series of calls and meetings that I was mostly not present for because they happened at a level that didn't include me. What I know is that the property coercion attempt had not been their first. There was a paper trail. There were texts and emails that Daniel had saved over the prior months, that he had quietly forwarded to his own attorney without telling anyone, because despite everything he had understood on some level that this was coming. My son is smarter than he gives himself credit for. He had been scared, and he had been isolated, and he had been manipulated by people who were very practiced at it. But he had also been quietly preparing. The father-in-law retained a lawyer. So did the brothers. Things that had happened in that county over many years began to receive attention they had not previously received. The kind of attention that comes when federal eyes start looking at a man who has spent decades mistaking local influence for legal authority. Deputy Carver was placed on administrative leave, pending review of several incidents. The connection between the county sheriff's department and certain property dealings began to be examined. None of that happened quickly. These things never do, but they happened. What I want to tell you about, more than the legal proceedings or the federal involvement or any of that, is the Thursday night, 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, when Daniel finally came to stay at my house for a while. He was in the middle of what was going to be a long divorce, and his legal situation was active, and there was nothing settled about any part of his life. He drove up on a Thursday evening, and I made the same meal I have made for every important occasion since his mother taught me the recipe. A pot roast with the carrots and potatoes she always said I put in wrong, but that always came out right. We ate at the kitchen table, the same table where I had stood 3 weeks earlier holding my phone and listening to that voicemail for the first time. The oak tree outside the window had no leaves now. The field was dark. We ate without talking much, the way men eat when they are tired in a deep way and comfortable enough that they don't need to fill the silence. "I keep thinking about how you knew," he said eventually, "just from the voicemail. I told you, you didn't say. Love you. I know." He moved his fork around on his plate. She was standing right there when I recorded it. She told me what to say. I thought I was doing it right. "You almost were." He smiled at that. It was the first real smile I had seen from him in weeks, maybe longer. "I thought about you the whole time I was in that room," he said. "I kept thinking, he'll figure it out. He always figures it out. He found me every single time when we played that game. You always knocked in the same pattern." "I know. I thought maybe you'd forgotten." "Daniel," I said, "I have never forgotten a single thing about you." He looked at his plate. She asked me, right at the beginning of all this, what my father would do if he found out. She meant it as a warning, like I should be afraid of you getting involved. He shook his head slightly. I don't think she understood what she was saying. I refilled his glass and mine. Outside, the wind moved through the bare branches of the oak tree and made the sound it always makes, the low, dry sound of winter, of things stripped down to what they actually are. We stayed at that table for a long time. We talked about his mother, which we don't do often because it still costs both of us something. But that night it felt right. We talked about the house he was going to have to decide what to do with, the future, the things you rebuild after something like this. At some point I told him about changing the tire, about the 12 minutes in the dark on the gravel with his father-in-law watching from the porch. "What were you thinking about?" he asked. "Your mother," I said, "the way I always do when something hard is happening." He was quiet for a moment. "Does it help?" "Every time," I said. "I want to say something before I finish, because I know there are people watching this who are in something that looks like what my son was in. Not necessarily as dramatic, not necessarily involving property or locked rooms, but something where the person who is supposed to love you has been slowly replaced by their family's agenda, where you can feel yourself disappearing and you don't quite know how to say it to the person who would want to help most. I want to say that the people who love you are paying attention, more attention than you realize. They notice the small things, the missing words, the rehearsed tone, the silence where there should be something. You do not have to knock on every wall to be heard. Sometimes the people who love you are already listening. And to the fathers watching this, and the mothers, and the siblings, and the friends, I want to say, trust it. Trust the thing that gets you out of your chair at 11 at night and onto a dark highway towards someone you love. Intuition is not drama. Worry is not weakness. When the people we love go silent in a way that doesn't sound like them, that silence is a message. Learn to read it. My son is doing well. The divorce is hard, the legal process is slow, and there are days that are harder than others. But he is in his own house now, on his own terms, and his wrist healed clean. He calls me every Sunday evening. He always ends the call the same way. I almost didn't drive that night. I sat at that kitchen table for 11 minutes, convincing myself I was overreacting. I had the bag packed already. I had the keys in my hand. I almost talked myself out of it. I just went, if you're watching this and something in your gut is telling you that someone you love needs you, don't wait for certainty. Certainty comes too late. Pack the bag. Get in the car. Drive toward them in the dark. You can figure out the rest when you get there.